You're listening to Driving Place-Based Innovation, a podcast series by Newcastle Gateshead Initiative, produced in partnership with the Digital Tourism Think Tank. I'm Nick Hall, and I'll be your host for this series where we're going to be looking at how digital and technology innovation is driving transformation of Northeast England's visitor economy. Throughout the series, we'll be sitting down with organisations near and far, balancing a local perspective where we hope to shine a light on innovation in and around Newcastle with global perspectives, bringing together learnings from further afield. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts to be sure that you don't miss out on future episodes. For more information about the series or to get in touch, just head over to ngi.org.uk/podcast, where you'll be able to find out more information and how to get involved. In episode 7 of Driving Place-Based Innovation, we dive into how human-centered methods can help us to drive innovation in destinations. We'll be inviting different takes to understand how focusing on the needs of users, rapidly exploring ideas through small iterations, and prototyping solutions can help us to improve tourism as a whole. Firstly, we'll meet with Hugh Lewis, Customer Services Director at Nexus. He'll be telling us about the exciting new fully bespoke metro trains designed through human-centered methods, which put the needs of its users right at the core of the process. The design process was made possible thanks to a strong collaboration with Newcastle University's Open Lab to apply design methods that ensure the city's metro system is future-ready and loved by everyone. Hugh will also be telling us more about how design and technology can improve the travel experience of passengers by involving their opinions in the decision-making process through creative and sometimes unconventional methods of involvement. We'll then head over to Skåne in Sweden to speak with two members of the Visit Skåne team, Maria Larsson, Head of Innovation, and Tirsa Ramos-Pedersen, UX designer and researcher. They'll be telling us more about how they've been working with different stakeholder groups in the destination to work on new projects where design-driven and human-centered methods have helped them to further the development in the destination. The conversation sparks many ideas, but perhaps one of the most poignant is the need sometimes to get uncomfortable when trying to tackle challenges. Our discussion is perhaps one of the best indicators yet of the direction in which tourism stewardship is headed, as a departure from growth in numbers.
So I'm Hugh Lewis. I'm the Customer Services Director at Nexus. We're the public body which owns and operates the Tyne and Wear metro system, one of the busiest and biggest light rail or urban transport systems in the UK, certainly the biggest outside London. My own role is to drive excellence in our delivery of the customer experience right across the services we provide. So on the metro, on our Shields Ferry link, and on the local buses that we contract. I look after the fares, look after what it feels like for people to make a journey, and make sure that's something that's embedded in everything we do in day-to-day delivery, but also our major capital projects and the investment we're making in the future of public transport.
Now, I know you've been undergoing a huge modernization program, and you've partnered up with Newcastle University to collaborate and work together on that. Tell us a little bit about what that looks like and why this collaboration is so important.
Well, we're investing £500 million over the next 5 years in the future of public transport, and in particular the Tyne and Wear metro system. And most of that money, more than 2/3 of it, is about the introduction of a new train fleet. So Metro opened in 1980 as the first modern light rail system in the UK. And believe it or not, it's got the same trains now, today, as it had back then on the day it opened in August 1980. Those trains are right at the end of their lives. And so we've been, for the last 7 years, we've been busy raising the funding and designing a new train fleet for a Tyne and Wear metro. Introducing a new train fleet's a unique project. Many railway systems are able to buy a train that's essentially off the shelf, that will be a core design that's provided by one of the big manufacturers worldwide. with perhaps a few modifications around the colour scheme, obviously, and the livery and perhaps the internal layout. Metro's different because the trains have to be built specially for us. We've got some unique kind of operating characteristics that mean that's the case. So that's both meant that it has taken much longer to introduce the new trains, and we know our passengers are desperate to see them and to see the transformation and journey experience that will lead to, as well as much better reliability. But although it takes longer, it means that we could have far more influence over the design than would be the case in many railway networks. I mean, we could literally sit down with a blank piece of paper and say, what do our customers actually want that train to be? And that's a fascinating question when you think about it, because I'll say two things. One, we absolutely have to get this right first time, because if these trains aren't designed well and aren't designed right for our customers, we can't pass them on to somebody else in 5 or 10 years' time. We are stuck with them, good or bad, for the next 4 decades. So the other thing to think about is that 4 decades. If I remember going out and when we began consultation and saying to customers, putting it like this, if you were perhaps a student or a young professional now, the train you'd want might be something that you leap on from your inner city halls or accommodation for a 5-minute ride into the city centre, kind of strapped hanging on a pole. You get a bit older, you move further out into the suburbs, then you'll appreciate a seat. You marry, you settle down, you have children, then you want space for your buggy to push your children's pushchair around. Perhaps you'll have a midlife crisis and need to take the bike out for the weekend. And perhaps later in life, you'll have mobility issues. You may even need to use a wheelchair or be unsteady on your feet, and you'll want space for that. Now, all of those things need to be designed into the same box, the same train carriage that will be with us for the 40 years. And actually, for some of the people who have been involved in the design process, they will go through all those stages in the life of this fleet.
It's really interesting to think of designing a train in such a bespoke way as something which is also able to carry people through the different stages of their lives, and to consider, I guess, that human aspect in the procurement of something so that is so much a piece of infrastructure, but at the same time, it's something that completely impacts people's lives on a day-to-day basis, and it shapes the experience they have in their day-to-day lives as well. Tell us a bit about some of the methods you put into place to incorporate human-centered design into that approach.
Well, sure. And that point about the whole life cycle, the 40 years, is because we wanted to involve customers as much as possible and from the word go. And everybody's competing in some way for a train that meets their needs. It's about the student or the young professional thinking about what they might want in 20 or 30 or 40 years' time, and therefore thinking about the needs of others, because we've got to fit everything into that one quite small box to meet everyone's needs. And that's where the team at Open Lab at Newcastle University really came in. They call themselves a digital civics team. And what that means is they're using a whole range of different digital and more traditional human techniques to really enable organizations like Nexus, like us, to speak to customers in a much more structured, a much more considered and therefore meaningful way. So that the public consultation that we did on these trains, I think went far beyond anything I've seen before. It was just light years beyond fill out a questionnaire, fill out a SurveyMonkey survey, and then let some expert in market research analyze the results and create pie charts and pivot tables. It really did begin to delve deep into what people thought they want, how they perceive themselves using space, and what conclusions you therefore draw from that.
It sounds like when we approach these consultation periods, whether it's in the development of a new strategic process or whether it's in building infrastructure, there's the need and an opportunity that you've shown here to completely rethink that process. As you mentioned, traditional surveys, they're great. They give you some form of insight, but the process that you've put in place is almost like creating a collaboration with your customers, with your users, and making sure that they're very much part of defining not only what they would like to see, but would it also be fair to say there's a process of observation and empathy that helps you to connect and understand how the decisions you take will impact their day-to-day lives in different ways?
Oh, totally. On that latter point, I'd particularly highlight what we've done in terms of this design around meeting the needs of all passengers, particularly those with disabilities. Yeah, I've lived with this process for the past 7 years. And one of our watchwords throughout was that if we design a train that better meets the needs of our disabled users, we design a better train for everybody. And in order to do that, you really have to understand the experience of somebody who's boarding in a wheelchair, somebody who has a visual impairment, either a complete visual impairment or sometimes a moderate one. Macular degeneration means that you lose vision at certain angles rather than completely in your eye to begin with, for example. And it's fascinating when you get into that. The people who have conditions which weaken their soft tissue, like muscles, that has an impact on how deep the cushion is in your seat, because a very deep, flumpy cushion, a bit like we have on our current train feet, is not that great for somebody to get out of if their arms are weak. It influences whether or not you put handholds near the seat, if you put hand rests there that somebody can push down on to get out. You can only get to that by really understanding a customer's lived experience. In terms of market research, I remember, you go to conferences and you might pick out one golden nugget from that conference that really changes your life. And I went to a presentation on market research and we were all asked what our favorite kind of birthday cake was. And we all pressed a button and, chocolate or strawberry or sponge or whatever. And then the woman said, how many of you were thinking about birthday cake before I asked you that question? And of course, I think one person put their hand up and said it was their birthday today and many happy returns. The point was, too much market research asks people questions out of context where they're not focused on what they're being asked. And therefore, there's a degree of randomness or ill consideration about their answers. What OpenLab did for us is it drew customers into the experience of riding the train, even when people couldn't see the train, and therefore made them think much more carefully about what they would like to see in the final design. So they used virtual reality, they used fly-throughs, they staged webinars at which different customers could talk to each other about their different needs, about their contrasting, competing needs. And all of that meant that what we ended up with, both as an initial design specification that was sent to the manufacturer to come up with a draft, and then a very intense process of refining that and making final decisions about the design, it's truly a train shaped by the customers who are going to use it like I don't think any before it in certainly the UK railway industry, perhaps in the whole world.
I mean, that's really exciting to think about that. And I think not only will the specification much better meet the needs of its users and hopefully have that longevity that obviously you're very much aware of, but I think this is also then something that people can feel a greater affinity with. They can love their metro, they can love the services that you provide. And I guess this is also something that's really important, as in particular right now, where we are very conscious of the needs to make sustainable choices in our day-to-day lives. How important has that sense of community been in this process? And what do you think that will mean for the travel decisions that people will make going forward?
Counting both waves of consultation, we've had 26,000 responses to, at some level, to the design questions we've raised, to the questions we've asked people about what they want from trains. And that ranges from somebody who may have taken part in a quick Twitter poll to somebody who has gone through a long webinar with other customers, or even in some cases, particularly with disabled users, we built a partial mock-up which could test, if you like, the geometry of getting on and off the train in a wheelchair, could test whether a guide dog would drag their owner inadvertently into a handhold. So 26,000 responses is an awful lot and is an awfully large proportion of our customers. So I hope in that sense that, yes, there's lots of people who say, yes, I can remember being part of designing this train, and others who will recognize the lengths we went to. But I suppose ultimately that's not a question of presentation and PR. As you say, it should come through as a train that meets people's needs, that people recognize as what they wanted, what they expected, or perhaps even what they didn't quite realize they wanted. And for us, that's really important because we are a public body. Nexus is a local public body that's funded by the local authorities and therefore the local taxpayers in Tyne and Wear in Northeast England. So we always regard ourselves as accountable and kind of responsible for meeting the needs of local people. But also, I think it goes beyond that. I hope what we've demonstrated here is this can be done, is that you can approach design of major infrastructure, of assets that are going to be used by the public for years and years to come, by starting with the public as your partners in that design process. Of course, we had experts. Our train manufacturer, Stadler, a Swiss company, they're building trains all the time for different cities and different regions of the world, and that expertise has been invaluable. But really asking the customer and really taking time to work with them to understand their aspirations, it can be done and it can be built into projects, and it should be built into projects. And I hope we've demonstrated that that doesn't add cost and that you get a better outcome for that.
And I guess the best accountability, the best PR as well, is the involvement of people in that process to create something that's authentic, to build a story that's actually a real story that comes out of that. And I guess this is really inspiring what you're sharing. And yet at the same time, it's a journey that you're very much still on. As we reach the end of this this part of the podcast, tell me a little bit about what was that fundamental decision early on that led you to the conclusion that going for an off-the-shelf, if such a thing can be quite so off-the-shelf, I think as someone who doesn't work in this industry, it's hard to imagine a train being off-the-shelf. But what was the decision to go for a completely bespoke approach as you've done? Or perhaps a better way of asking that is, what was it about the existing offer on the market that you felt wasn't going to quite suit the needs in the way that you've been describing here?
We really did have a light bulb moment in which we said, gosh, we really can put the customer at the center of this design. The train had to be built for us for technical reasons. It had to be a certain height and have a certain axle weight and a certain length of carriage in order to get round some of the bends on the metro system. Although the system opened in 1980, we use infrastructure that goes back to the 1830s, in fact, in some cases. So there's some tight corners and there's some low tunnels. So if you like that box I talked about, the outside of the box had to be a particular shape. And therefore, the light bulb moment was to say, well, in that case, don't we have a much bigger influence over the inside of the box? Because whichever company wins the contract to build this is going to have to kind of start from scratch on that. It can't just give us an off-the-shelf design. And that's the case. And Nexus as a public body, we've always tried to push further on public involvement and inclusion in our projects and in our service delivery. And this was the new train fleet for Metro. It doesn't come bigger than that for Nexus. And so it was within our ethos and culture to involve the customer. And we simply realized that we could to a way that's never been done before. And now, 7 years on, with the trains about to come into service at the end of 2023, you take a step back. I've just been on the first one to be delivered a couple of weeks ago. You kind of take a step back and you go, wow, this is what we actually did. And I'll just give you one example of how that played out of many within the new train, is that one of the first things we ask the customer, because it's fundamental, is what do you want the seat layout to be? And it's a tricky one because most people want the seats to be back against the walls, a bit like on London Underground trains, in order to give the maximum amount of space to move around the train. And that makes sense because most people travel in the rush hour and it's really busy and space is at a premium. So they want as much space as possible. But that's only most people. That's perhaps 2/3 of people. The other third want as many seats as possible because they're those people who are making the longer journeys to the suburbs or perhaps traveling at off-peak times, and they want the comfort and guarantee to know there's as many seats as possible. So very early on in our consultation, we established that we were going to have this longitudinal seat design, maximum amount of space. When we presented with Stadler, the manufacturer, the first draft of the design, people said, can you put more seats in? We kind of like what you've done, but can you put more seats in? Now, as it happened, by working with Open Lab at Newcastle University, we had saved an enormous amount of money on the conventional design process of a train, where you build a full-size mock-up of a train and put it out in a public area and have people wander around it. We couldn't do that because of the pandemic, because of lockdowns. So Open Lab and Stadler created a VR-based experience, and people could look at it online. We saved £200,000 by not building a mock-up, but instead putting the consultation online. I also think we got a much more meaningful consultation experience and a much more immersive one, ironically, out of that online consultation. So when our customer said, can you put more seats into the trains? Well, I went back to the project team and said, well, I have £200,000 that I've just saved you to spend on seats. And Stadler came up with a plan to put 12 more seats per train in, tip-up seats, in fact, in what will be the cycle and children's buggy area. And that cost £200,000. So there was this wonderful circle in which we saved some money by designing a better and a more immersive online consultation. And we spent the money we saved, the £200,000, on responding to one of the biggest findings of that consultation, and therefore giving customers more of what they wanted from the new trains.
What a great achievement and a great outcome. And lastly, what does the time scale look like? Where are the trains now, and when can people expect to be enjoying and experiencing these in the coming months and years?
Well, Metro customers will know that the trains can't come soon enough. The existing fleet from 1980 really is on its last legs. We're struggling with Stadler to maintain a service. The first new trains have been delivered to the Northeast. They were delivered in early 2023. As I say, 7 years on from when we first sat down and began to think about design, but we needed to win funding first, and then we needed to go through a global procurement exercise and then finalize the design with Stadler and our customers, and then begin the construction process. First new trains arrived, well, the very first one in February, and we expect to see the first trains into service at the end of 2023, at the end of this year. And then they'll roll out quite fast during 2024, a new train coming into service every couple of weeks. And that's the opportunity. That's the acid test. I don't think I'll do any project that's lasted as long as this has been as focused over those years, has been so potentially rewarding in the continual engagement with customers. And when that first train enters customer service at the end of this year, I'll definitely be sat on it. And I'll be sat on it in order to say to the first customers that get on, well, what do you think? Did we get this right? Fingers crossed.
Now let's head over to Sweden, where we check in with Maria and Tirsa to hear more about how human-centered design is driving a shift in the role and opportunities created by tourism.
My name is Maria, and I'm head of innovation at Visit Skåne.
And my name is Tirsa, and I am the UX designer at Visit Skåne.
That's already very exciting to meet two wonderful people with such exciting job titles. I think these are positions that we rarely see within tourism organizations. So I'm already pretty excited about what we're going to be discussing today. Now, one of the reasons we were so keen to connect with you is that we know that Visit Skåne, or Tourism in Skåne, has been really, really focused on human-centered design approaches. And you've embedded this into tackling some of the complex societal challenges that as a DMO you've decided to take on and incorporate at the center of your work. So tell us a little bit more about how these methods and the wider vision is all coming together and incorporated into your approach to innovation.
Sure. I would like to actually start a little bit broader than just specifically talking about innovation. So bear with me. I'll start abstract, but we'll get to the concrete stuff. So I would rather start by talking about Skåne as a destination and a place and where we're going when we look at 2030 and beyond. So what we normally talk about being our vision is Skåne being a place where tourism and events matters. And I think that is the guiding star for everyone in our organization. What we mean by that is Skåne as a place, a destination where instead of a visitor perhaps annoying the locals or wearing and tearing, we want the place to really thrive in the footsteps of that visitor. Sometimes there are those who talk about tourism as mainly like the good of tourism being that it generates profits for tourism companies or event companies or generates a lot of jobs during peak seasons. And for sure, it does do that. But we definitely want to go beyond that in our work and in our calling and look at how we can use the visitor as a positive force for solving complex societal challenges. And there, now I come then to innovation because we use that as a tool. It's rather a method of how do we approach those very big, very complicated challenges that they can be looked at globally and local at the same time. Biodiversity, for example, or environmental topics being examples of that. So innovation for us is very much a tool to approach that, basically.
Yeah, so Tirsa, tell us a little bit about then how your role comes into translating that bigger vision, especially about the visitor and the positive impact that visitors can actually have, to actually tangibly moving that into something that you can then work on and develop.
As Maria said with innovation, first of all, we have a very good innovation strategy that we work off of to make sure before we go into any process that is it relevant to us? Do we have the right conditions? Do we have the right people on board? We have like almost of a checklist that we need to meet before we even go into a project, ideally. And then as a UX designer, which you said, I haven't found many others of myself in this industry. And everybody seems to be very excited when they hear that. Well, how do you combine UX design with tourism or within a DMO? And I have a background in design and I try to implement design thinking model. And I do a lot of code design and research before we start any project. But I've also noticed as I'm talking to people, like so many people within this industry already have that mindset of thinking about the different stakeholders that are involved, trying to solve certain problems. And I think everybody's capable of coming to solutions, even if they're not designers, if they don't have one in-house. But it's just more of I guess what I bring to the table is doing it in a very systematic way.
Great. And I think it's really interesting to think about that everybody can maybe get in touch with design as an idea for generating ideas and for contributing and being part of a process. As you say, a lot of different tourism organizations have this desire to use code design and to use methods that foster collaboration to move forwards and to progress their activities. And you've done that really successfully, I think, by adopting and embracing these methods. Tell us a little bit about how this has come together in different projects, some of the initiatives that you've been able to establish and work, I think, quite successfully with.
Yeah, I think it's actually really interesting because I think with us, Visit Skåne, the innovation part of it is very new, still newish. I guess 2 years now is probably not that new, but it still feels very new. And I feel like we go into every project with an openness, with an understanding that this could totally fail, but that's okay. We're going to try it anyways. We're going to see what happens. We're going to try to get the right people on board and just see what we can get, what we can create, what kind of output there is. And sometimes that output can be very concrete, and then other times it's more connections being made, inspiration, and we're okay with that. Like it's okay that we have different outputs, and we even go into the processes in different ways. We usually like to start with me doing like a pre-study, where I go kind of map out and see who are the different actors involved here, who should we speak to, not only from other DMO levels or within the industry, but even outside the industry, what governmental organizations are there, what local organizations there are. Sometimes there's a lot of citizens out there who want to be involved and who have very strong opinions and who are being impacted by certain approaches and activities that are happening. So we want to bring those people in and we want to make sure that they have a voice and that they contribute to the process. So I think in the beginning with the human-centered design is getting the right people on board, listening to those different voices and letting them have a say into how we create and set up the actual innovation process. It's very key.
I think also one thing is that at this point, having had quite a few processes and projects, I think at least for me, when we move into new processes and projects, but maybe also for you, Tirsa, you have to tell me how you feel about it. But I think I almost always assume that it's going to get rough. And because these processes are multiple stakeholders that are going to meet around the table, they all have different kind of visions and missions that they're supposed to work with. And everyone is always very busy. So time is also a precious resources. And then we're going to all meet and talk about and find a very kind of operational, concrete way of tackling these challenges. So that almost always is a very engaging and fun process, very rewarding for sure. But it is also something that can be a bit uncomfortable, definitely. And I've actually, for myself and also with some of my colleagues, talk about being comfortable with being uncomfortable. Because for me, that's really what it's a lot about that. You're not always going to know exactly where you're going, or if the result is going to be something that you can use, or that will make potential financiers happy. You know, you have all of those things to take into consideration. And the short version is that you won't always know. And you just have to trust the process and continue forward, basically.
It does seem like a very challenging concept to translate to stakeholders, perhaps those that you report to, who would like to see something quite concrete. They'd like to see a program or a project that has very, very clear milestones and deliverables at the end of it that they want to perhaps define right at the beginning before it's even started. And then, of course, there's the accountability that, as maybe you say, there's that comfort with having certainty about what accountability looks like if you can put numbers on it. So a certain reach or a certain impact or a certain change. And I guess this is really, really an entirely different mindset when we think about these methods. Would it be right to say it's not about not having that accountability, but changing the expectations that are associated with it?
I would say so, most definitely. And we've had those discussions also on a more strategic level and also in dialogue with other regions and DMOs and so on. We have to actually look at the structure of how we set these projects and processes, like how we set them up from the beginning. It is not going to be a very innovative process if you start off by saying in 5 years, the project must have generated this. Innovation dies already at the draft table of that document. But that requires a bit of a shift where we're okay with then having a very unsure outcome, let's say.
Yeah, and I think I've had those conversations before. It's like, yes, this is what we set out to do. I can deliver that. If that's what you want, I can 100%, I can tell you right now, I can make that happen. I can give you that deliverable that you asked for, a year ago when we thought this was the problem. We now know it's actually, the problem is actually this over here. And if you give me the time, the resources to explore that a little bit more, I'm pretty sure we could come up with something even better than the original deliverable. But then, you need to have those dialogues with people where are they willing to let you explore that a little bit more? But even like, for example, now in this project I'm having, I've kind of mentally separated it into 3 different deliverables. So there's like that one that we said we were going to do, that we promised everybody. So the very concrete things. There's the part of what we want to do as an organization of getting people to physically test something out. This is something that we can say X amount of people have done this and tested it and it either works or it doesn't work. And then there's this little seed of, we see potential here in the corner over here. Maybe let's start exploring it a little bit. We're never going to have a deliverable for that within here, but we can come to different insights that if we want to, we can move forward after this project with. But if you just stick to that first one, you're never going to be able to get to the, the great potentialities with the other two.
And I guess it's all about challenging assumptions that we maybe bring to a project or bring to a certain discussion where perhaps we're informed by our own firsthand experience, but we also need to consider everybody else's experience in that process. And that's sometimes quite difficult to do. Tell us a little bit about some of the projects where you've really been given, if you like, that permission to take time to step back, to explore, and to take a more open approach to working on something. I know we heard from you at X Design Week about project footprints, and that was really inspiring. And I know you've also worked on other projects over the last couple of years at the New Thinkers Workshop and Christivity. So tell us a little bit about how these projects came together and the process that was involved with these.
I think that was the best part of Project Footprints, was that that was our own project that we created, that we saw this potential and this opportunity, and we could explore it. We didn't have anybody that we needed to report to, or here's what we promised you. It was very much an exploration that at the end of that process has sparked so much interest from others that now they want to collaborate with us. I told you before we started recording that I just came back from a trip about canoeing, and we were only invited into that project because of Project Footprints. They saw what we did there, and they said, "Hey, we want to try to do that too. Can you come in and help us to do it ourselves in this new area of Skåne?" Yes, sure, we'll try that. And I think that was the best part of Footprints, that we can create whatever we wanted. We can bring in all these different actors from different backgrounds. We did an open call where we usually would probably only be in Swedish, but we also did it in English this time. And it was able to even open up that net of qualified people who could be in the room. I don't know. That was the best part of that. We were able to explore and just come to any possibility. And now we're still reaping the rewards from that project.
I think also because sometimes perhaps innovation, people perhaps tend to think about like a new invention or like a technical thing that, it makes everything more efficient or it costs less money, that kind of stuff. But I mean, we're also very much about what you're mentioning, Tirsa, because the county board, for example, through Project Footprints, actually, we developed a relationship with them. And now we work very closely with them together in different projects. And when the new kind of challenges are coming, these complex societal ones that I mentioned earlier, then all of a sudden we have a partnership immediately to fall back on that. How are we going to approach this? And that in itself is one kind of innovation, because it's a completely new working method of how to approach a problem. So I think also in general, we try to be at least quite open about what is innovation at the end of the day, because it can also be completely new business models, new cooperation models, and so on.
Yeah. Oh, one thing I would like to say there is with Christivity, the project I am in now, we stopped referring to it as an innovation process, and now we call it a new thinkers process. Because we learned that when you throw in innovation to, hotel owners and a restaurateur, it sounds intimidating. Like, oh my God, innovation, I can't do that. I don't know what that is. They think we're going to come in and, completely turn the world upside down. So now it's the new thinkers process. And everybody seems to be like, yeah, I can think in a new way. I can do that. And they jump on board right away. Whereas before we had a little bit of hesitation, like, oh, can I do that? I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's a direct translation into English. It works much better in Swedish, but really it is very awkwardly translated. But we still wanted to keep that because that also relates to the process itself. It's very rarely that I introduce myself as head of innovation, actually. I normally just say that I work with development, because as Tirsa say, it can be really intimidating, and already there you can, exclude people who immediately feel like, oh, I don't know anything about that I don't want to be involved.
It's really interesting to think about these simple things like how we phrase something or how we give a title to something and how that can shape everything that follows that. So the people's expectations, but as you say, also the sense of accessibility. Innovation as a word, as a concept, will excite some people, but it will also alienate others. And I certainly come across day to day people who associate innovation with technology, which of course is not wrong, but it's not only It's not the only way we can think about innovation as well. And it seems that through this process of working differently, you've been able to be very successful in creating an almost realignment of your mandate and your role and your relationship with everybody who you have to interact with. Would you say that your mandate as an organization has evolved with this? I mean, something like Project Footprints, it's all about stewardship. And I imagine if we were having this discussion 7 years ago, perhaps that wouldn't have been the kind of core remit or focus of something that you were mandated to do as an organization.
No, definitely. If you look back in time, I think I remember when I came on board, we still talked about the amount of guest nights, like hotel nights spent as like a KPI of how successful the season were in terms of tourism. And I think we've completely look at that from a different perspective today. And I would hope, I think that we do have a different mandate. I think we talk a lot more about having a clear vision of what we want Skåne as a destination to look like and to disregard all truths. We call it in Swedish, yet another term that translates awkwardly. But things that you perhaps thought were true, or they were true at one point in time, but that your situational reality have developed so much that they are no longer true, basically, that you need to really face up to them and to be open to basically the systemic shift that needs to happen. And I think being a public actor like Visit Skåne, like we are, we have a role to play in that. I think if we are going to really tackle these kind of societal challenges, it will require us, but also others like us, to be an enabler of these kind of processes. Event or tourism companies might not have the incentive or the resources to do that. And there we can kind of step in and start up a process or a project that could really kind of go into that kind of detail, so to say. But it will require, I think, for everyone to be open to go beyond their immediate task or mission as an organization. It will require more of us than that.
Yeah, which is difficult. I can understand that they have, like, especially if you work for a municipality. Yes, okay, you have this tourism aspect, the sustainability aspect, but you also have schools, you have roads, there's so many other priorities, I would say, for them that they need to juggle. And so I think that's why we're able to do so much that we do, because we have this one mandate, we have this one focus of creating a more sustainable Skåne for everyone who visits and or resides here. And so we can be that enabler, that actor, that spark that brings all these different people together in a very focused way.
And I think that you've made the case very clearly for all of those destinations, those tourism organizations that have been going through this transition, about why their role is really unique, even if the focus or emphasis is no longer about growth and bed nights, but it's about finding that difference, finding that place where the organization plays a really unique role. And I think you rightly point out to the many different mandates that everybody else is faced with, whether it's education, whether it's cultural needs. And yet at the same time, as a DMO, you're able to reach out into all of those areas, but also keep the focus on the sense of place, the sense of identity that it can bring people living in it, people visiting it, and how those different communities and priorities can actually converge. So it's a real sense of leadership and stewardship, but from a bottom-up perspective, I guess. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, no, definitely. I do think it is. Definitely. What do you think, Tirsa?
I agree with it as well. And I think because we're not so like in it, I think sometimes when you have so many things you're trying to do, you get really focused in just the problems. We're able to kind of take a step back, breathe, look at the whole picture, see, identify those different actors that are at play and, start those conversations, start those collaborations.
And I guess sometimes when you're not in a position of trying to defend or trying to advocate for one thing or another, you can maybe advocate and work on behalf of everybody in the way that you've been able to do. What would you say is the next step for you? You've obviously changed things quite significantly in terms of relationships and collaboration. What would you say is the next opportunity on the horizon? How can you take things to the next level?
I have an answer for myself as the UX designer. So for me, as a person who's like in it, it's super. I'm realizing how important these connections are. I'm going out there more now, and I'm meeting different people from the municipalities. I'm meeting landowners to see how tourists use their land here in Sweden. I'm just meeting so many different people out there, and I think like the more that I'm meeting, the more insights I'm gaining, but also realizing how certain things connect with each other and finding opportunities here and there. And even within our projects with New Thinkers Workshop and with Crisativity, they're completely different target groups. One was event arrangers and one is hotel owners. But oh my God, they had the same exact problems and frustrations, and it was so interesting to see that they're struggling with very similar things, even though they came from very different industries. It's still the same industry, kind of. But I think it just, the more I can learn about the different people involved, the different systems involved, I can try to find a bridge between those and see more solutions and opportunities for solution. That's kind of where I'm at the moment. But on the organizational level, Maria.
Well, I mean, from a strategic standpoint of innovation and where we're at in the organization, I would say that the processes, like on average, if we start up one project or process, it normally spawns like 2 or 3 new ones. At the moment, we have a lot of projects and processes still going, and we're finding out more, and we're continuing to develop. And then we find a new cooperation partner who wants to be involved, and so on. So it's almost like it just keeps on going. So that is probably one of our next steps, to continue to work like that, of course, but then also to see in terms of then actually implementing solutions that then goes back according to the design thinking model to that actually then solves the original problem. I would say that's probably one of the next steps for the organization. And I also have to just share, working with so closely with Tirsa, it's been really an amazing experience and so interesting and rewarding. I've had these moments, of insight along the way, and one of those which I carry with me in almost every meeting I'm in now, which is probably very annoying to some of my colleagues, is just the human centered approach and the human behavior aspect of, like, it doesn't really at the end of the day matter what you put in a document or a strategy or something. Like, that doesn't necessarily mean that people are going to follow that. And like, it's rather about understanding why do people behave the way they do, and what are their real needs, and how can you then use whatever insights you arrive at when you've looked at that. How can you use that to solve the actual problem? It's been eye-opening, I would say.
I think you've summarized what I'm thinking, just listening to both of you perfectly. So I just want to say a huge thanks for taking the time to join us today to tell us a little bit more about your projects, but more importantly, your methods and your approaches, and how this is inspiring a completely different way of looking at the world and looking at the relationships and looking at the work we do. You've been listening to Place-Based Innovation with myself, Nick Hall. The producer of this series is Ana Balaguer-Sanchez, production and editing by Dan Hopkins. The series is part of the Hospitality Innovation Tourism Supply Programme, which supports businesses in Northumberland, Newcastle and North Tyneside to meet challenges through innovation. The programme is funded by North of Tyne Combined Authority and delivered by Newcastle Gateshead Initiative, Food and Drink Northeast and NBSL. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts to get notified of future episodes. And if you've enjoyed today's podcast, why not take a moment to leave a review? Thanks, and we'll see you next time.